Welcome to the Israel Daily News, Benyamin Moalem. It is great to have you with us for our new segment called Deep Dive, where we're going to have policy discussions and get into the weeds on certain headlines that come up throughout the week that we may be giving attention to in the rundown at the Israel Daily News. But with you, we're going to do exactly what the segment is called. We're going to give it a deep dive. Benyamin Moalem is a lawyer and he worked as a foreign law clerk at the Supreme Court of Israel. He has a unique vantage point on Israeli news stories because of his legal background. And we're grateful to you for bringing some of your expertise to us here. Benjamin has a very popular Instagram page called By Moalem on Instagram, BY for his initials. And he talks about a variety of different news issues that come up throughout the cycle. He breaks news and then he gets deep onto it on his page. And we're grateful to him for coming over to the Israel Daily News. Thanks for being with us, Benjamin.
Pleasure to be with you.
Okay, so today we're going to talk about the military advocate, Yifat Yerushalmi. It is always a long way to go when I'm saying her full name. We're going to talk about her and how she allegedly not only leaked a classified video from the Sde Teiman detention facility, but then allegedly conducted an investigation from her own department, not really letting anyone know that it was actually her who leaked that video. And of course, as we've discussed, this has not gone to trial yet. So these are accusations and
She hasn't been indicted
allegations.
yet.
She hasn't even been indicted yet. I assume that she will. Currently, she is in the hospital. I'm going to have you share a little bit about that with us. So, Benjamin, tell us about this story in general and then give us the sequence of events.
All right, so the story really starts in the summer of 2024. Five soldiers allegedly abused a Palestinian detainee at the Sde Teiman prison in southern Israel. And about a little over a month later, military police showed up at the base and arrested nine men. Eventually, five of them were indicted. The other four were no charges were pressed against them. And there was a massive protest in the prison, including a number of lawmakers who didn't like the fact that Israel, which in them is fighting a massive war against a terrorist entity that slaughtered 1,200 people only 10 months earlier, and now is arresting five soldiers who allegedly abused a Hamas terrorist. Now, the alleged victim in this case was a Hamas terrorist who was apprehended in Gaza during the war, not an October 7th terrorist. But it didn't sit well with a lot of Israelis that Israel is using its legal forces against the soldiers who put their lives on pause and went back to the military to fight in the war instead of against the terrorists themselves. Fast forward a few days later, a video is leaked, and the video shows doesn't show much, but it shows the alleged abuse that happened in that on that day. We see about five soldiers carrying away one Palestinian detainee from an area of the prison. Some of them are putting up shields, so you don't really see what happens behind those shields. But allegedly, that's where one of the men abuses the Palestinian detainee. Now, medical reports showed that the detainee had a sharp object that caused a rupture near his rectum. That led to a lot of reports about, sodomy and the like. What's interesting to note is that the indictment does not say that they committed sexual abuse. It just says that they committed abuse, which is illegal as well, but legally there's a distinction. So that's the story in a nutshell back in 2024 in the summer. So people were very upset. And fast forward to October of this year, um, a report comes out that it was indeed the military advocate general herself who leaked the video. Now, in the interim between the events of summer of 2024 and now, the men were indicted back, I believe, in January or February of this year. And people wanted to know who leaked the video because officially this video is a confidential property of the military, and people are not supposed to just leak it to the media. The military advocate general herself took it upon herself to conduct the investigation. There was a court order to have an investigation conducted. The attorney general signed off the Attorney General, Gali Barov Miara, signed off on the military advocate general taking this investigation under her wing. Now, what's odd here is that people didn't want her to be in charge of it because the leak came from her office. So people were arguing that, well, an external body should come and conduct the investigation because we're essentially asking you to investigate yourself. The Attorney General backed up the military advocate general, saying, no, she's capable. She'll do a fair investigation. She conducted the investigation and found that we can't find who the leaker is. We did everything we could. There is no leaker. She allegedly signed an affidavit to that effect. The Attorney General went to bat for her. Again, the Attorney General is not accused of any wrongdoing herself, and basically said, well, we tried. We couldn't find who leaked the video. Fast forward to October of this year, the military is conducting a routine polygraph examination of certain senior officials, just to ensure that everything is, no confidential information is being leaked and so on. And it turns out that a senior member of the military advocate general's office failed the polygraph exam and basically admitted that they were told by the military advocate general to leak the video to the press. So this makes headlines all over Israel. The military advocate general is the one who leaked the video. And she takes leave of absence. A few days later, she sends a resignation letter to the IDF chief of staff. And in it, she explains why she leaked the video. She says that she leaked the video because of the immense pressure that was being placed on her department. Again, she wasn't doing this to be a whistleblower in the media or anything like that. She did it basically to alleviate the pressure that was being placed on her department in the military from a lot of people, protesters, politicians who were saying, why are you wasting your time defending these terrorists? She wanted to show that no, this is actually a serious case of abuse. And if I leak this video, people will understand that we're talking about a serious case of abuse that really should be prosecuted. This is not a case of roughing up somebody who's a terrorist. And again, the Sde Teiman prison is not for people who swiped a Hershey's bar from the local convenience store. These are people who committed some very, very serious crimes against Israelis, including murder and other crimes like that. So she wanted to show that no, still we're a law-abiding military, and therefore these people deserve to be prosecuted. What happened was a few days later, she kind of went missing. She was not arrested immediately. She went missing, and there was what was understood to be a suicide note. A manhunt was was triggered by the police. She was found alive and well, minus her cell phone. She was arrested at that point. After about 5 days in detention, she was released to house arrest, and then the next morning rushed to the hospital after having reportedly overdosed on sleeping pills. She's still in the hospital now, clearly not in a great mental state, but that's the gist of what happened since the actual alleged abuse at the Sde Teiman prison. What is important to note here is that you've got kind of competing narratives here on both sides of the political spectrum. On one hand, you have certain media outlets in the international media who are always looking to be a little bit more critical of Israel. They're kind of painting this as Israel's going after the whistleblower, when that's not the case. Two things could be true at once. The five men who allegedly committed the abuse at the prison, they could be guilty of the crime they committed, and at the same time, she could be guilty of the crime she allegedly committed because they're two separate set of facts that they're being charged for or accused of. And and we're not seeing that narrative on some of those, I guess you would call it, for lack of a better term, on the far left, or at least in the international media, who want to kind of paint this as, well, is Israel now prosecuting the whistleblower who's trying to point out that, abuse is going on? No. They're prosecuting somebody who leaked confidential information, which in the grand scheme of things is not that big of an issue from a criminal law perspective. From a PR perspective, it was very bad for Israel, but from a criminal law perspective, things get leaked all the time. Officially, she would face up to 3 years in prison for that leak. But what's worse than that is the cover-up. She's being accused of obstruction of justice because the cover-up itself, she said, in an affidavit that we conducted an investigation, we can't find the leaker. When all along, if she's the one who leaked it, then she obviously would have been able to find the leaker. And that is a much more serious charge from a criminal law perspective. Again, she hasn't been indicted yet, so we don't know what exactly she'd be facing. But she could, if she's charged on the more serious crimes here, she could be facing up to 7 years in jail for that. So it's really two separate crimes. And then on the flip side, you've got some people, maybe on the more far right in Israel, saying, well, if she leaked this and she committed all these crimes allegedly to cover it up, well, that must mean that everything is fake, the abuse never happened. And again, a court will decide whether the abuse happened, whether it didn't, or whether there's enough evidence to chart to convict the men. However, that doesn't necessarily, the fact that she allegedly committed a crime, or even if she did commit a crime, that does not change the fact that the five men may have committed a crime as well. So there is no evidence, as far as we know, that the underlying events depicted in the video that was leaked were modified in any way. Again, we don't see very much. You see something going on behind some shields, but it's really kind of a competition of narratives when the real facts of the matter are these are really two separate cases. Yes, obviously one is relating to the other one, but the criminal charges that are pending in each case are independent of one another.
Thanks so much for going through that. I want you to take us to the Sde Teiman detention facility. What is a detention facility? And following you explaining to us about the way that detention works in Israel, in my view, as an American, actually, it could be very shocking the way that detention works in Israel.
What aspect in particular?
In
Yeah.
the aspect that you could be held in a detention center for a long time without having a lawyer and without there being hard evidence as to what you did.
Right. So there's two separate things to discuss here. One is the issue of detention for Israeli civilians, which is what the military advocate general is being charged as. Again, she resigned from the army. She's being charged in the civilian judicial system. Israel does have, in the United States, for example, detention is somebody will be held without bond, for example, if they are a danger to society or a flight risk. In Israel, they will often be kept in detention for a period of time to prevent obstruction of justice. It's something that you'll see a lot more often here than you'll see or in Israel as opposed to in the United States, because that's not a reason to keep somebody in detention. Um, when we're talking about the Palestinian detainees, we're talking about a different legal system. We're talking about military law, and we're talking about people who are being detained for, fighting for an enemy entity like Hamas. So all the issues of detention, that's kind of not going to be, you know, you can't let out alleged terrorists on bail because they're not coming back. So so they're going to be held in detention if they're whether they were terrorists who were arrested on October 7th. They're going to be held in jail until their trial is conducted, whenever that happens. And I mean, they'd also be considered danger to society. And also, you had 1,700 people who were arrested during the war in Gaza and then were held in detention during this time. And I mean, because there's legal ramifications to the term prisoner of war. I don't want to use that term, but similar to the case of like how a prisoner of war is going to be held in detention, these guys are going to be held in detention as well because they are enemy combatants. These guys are being held at the Sde Teiman prison. Israel had to reopen the Sde Teiman prison, which had been closed years earlier, but Israel ran out of space in its prisons for Palestinian detainees because of the amount that were arrested throughout the war. So these men are held there. Fast forward to last month when the hostage deal is signed, and Israel kind of goes from 0 to 60. A week before the hostage deal was conducted, nobody in Israel really thought this was going to happen as quickly as it did. Israel was still waging war in Gaza City. All of a sudden, Israel signs a deal. The U.S. gets the deal done, and Israel's got to release 1,700 prisoners back into Gaza who were detained during the war. Among those 1,700 people are this alleged victim. Now, for the prosecution, there's going to be a serious hurdle for the prosecution to overcome because these five men in order to convict them, you're going to need that guy to be basically their key witness. He's the alleged victim. Without him saying, "Oh yeah, this happened," that's kind of your foundation of your whole case. Now, the charges have not been dropped at this point, but this is a significant hurdle for the prosecution to get a conviction against these five men because he's back in Gaza now and he's not coming back to Israel to testify. So that's kind of the situation there on the detention end.
You really explained it very well. Thanks for taking us into all of the different departments. And yes, I was talking about the military arrest, which of course we understand that when a Palestinian terrorist is being picked up for terrorism, and most of these detention centers are holding people who've committed heinous crimes, you are in as an American, which I am first. My first citizenship was American. You are innocent until proven guilty. So I do think that it can be kind of shocking or,
Well, even in
catches
America,
your attention.
in America under military law, you had Guantanamo Bay, for example, to talk about a prison most recently used for enemy combatants. It's kind of similar in that respect. The U.S. would not have allowed the detainees from the Afghanistan war to let them out until trial because they're definitely not coming back. So it's kind of similar in that respect.
So that's very interesting. Do you think that the reason that there's more play about that issue is just anti-Israel sentiments trying to highlight things like that? For example, I don't think that there are people protesting against Guantanamo Bay necessarily in the United States.
Well, you had, I mean, the Guantanamo Bay has been around for since 2000, well, shortly after 2000 or 2001 or shortly thereafter, at whenever point the detainees were started to be brought there. And there was an amount of controversy surrounding that prison. Yes, Israel is under the microscope on the international stage for whatever reason we can discuss perhaps another time. But yes, there are a lot of people who like to know and like to find fault in things that Israel does in international media. People like to say, oh, or in defense of Israel, well, Israel's not perfect. There's no country that's perfect. Like that's not even something that even should be something that is, discussed. But Israel's margin of error, for whatever reason, in the international media is negative. Meaning Israel could have the best PR. They could have zero problems with the way that they hold detainees. And it's kind of a catch-22, right? If you're too easy on detainees, well, these are people who raped and murdered and did all sorts of heinous crimes. At the same time, obviously it's illegal to do whatever these men were are allegedly committed against him, or the alleged abuse that they conducted. So it's always a fine line. You're always going to have critics. Israel's margin of error, for whatever reason, in the international community is a negative margin of error. So if everything was perfect, Israel would still be losing the battle for international opinion. One could argue by how much would Israel be losing by, but the cards are stacked against it, whether it's because there are over 1.5 billion Muslims in the world and 15 million Jews, and you've also have a lot of political aspects involved, whether it's in Europe or in the United States, or perhaps beyond the scope of our topic of discussion here.
So, going toward the Sde Teiman detention facility, there was a damning report that came out by Haaretz several months ago detailing very heinous treatment of Palestinians, detained Palestinians, talking about scabies, skin irritations and diseases passed from one another, issues of being fed, all kinds of issues like that. And then this video comes out. This video is leaked of allegedly five IDF soldiers taking a Palestinian detainee to the side where you can't quite see what's going on in the video and abusing him. How legitimate are these reports about these detention facilities? And some people would say, and by the way, there was a lot of pushback, especially from right wing advocates saying these IDF soldiers are doing their work. How dare you punish them or try to punish them for doing what they need to do, and also the concept that the people that are in the detention center have done heinous things themselves, even though they haven't been convicted necessarily of these crimes. So, can you speak to that? Can you respond to that?
Sure. Again, I wasn't in the prison, so I didn't see firsthand what actually is happening there. Again, we can talk about different media outlets. It is telling that this story came from Haaretz and not any other media outlet in Israel. Haaretz tends to find, stories that paint Israel in a bad light, and again, we can discuss, the merits of that or not, and then reporting it. I would say though that number one, Sde Teiman is not meant to be a five-star hotel. It's a prison, and it's a prison for some pretty bad people. So, look at reports about what goes on, and Israel aside, any prison in the world, it's not going to be a great place to be. Now, in terms of the abuse, I think the fact that the military prosecuted these five men, and again, they were prosecuted before the video was leaked. The video was leaked in the end by the admission of the military advocate general to defend accusations against her department of, nitpicking, or, trying to prosecute five soldiers who put their lives on pause to go, serve their country. The fact that the military advocate general did prosecute these men shows that no, Israel does have laws, and does not allow illegal abuse to occur in the prisons. Um, Again, so to every single report about again, it's a prison. It's not meant to be a great place. The conditions are not going to be great, but abuse is illegal. And that was the message that the military was sending by indicting and prosecuting these five men.
Thank you for explaining that. So take us to the troubles with the Attorney General's office dealing with the Major General Yifat Yerushalmi, the military advocate. Just highlight that for us simply again. What were the issues in prosecution at this point?
All right, so if we go back to the time when the video was leaked, there was a petition to the Supreme Court that the leak should be investigated. Because the leak, while maybe it had the intended effect for the military advocate general of providing a defense for her department, saying like, no, this is a legitimate prosecution. Again, not much is seen. It was a PR disaster for Israel. And at the end of the day, it was a classified file that was leaked to the press illegally. Instead of selecting an outside external body to investigate the leak, uh, the Attorney General agreed to allow the Military Advocate General to investigate the leak that happened from her own office. Basically backing her up, saying that, hey, we rely on you. You conduct this investigation, and we trust that you will do it correctly. The investigation happens. The investigation is concluded with couldn't find the leaker. There are ostensibly an affidavit that is signed to that effect that we conducted the investigation. We tried as hard as we could. We couldn't find who leaked the video.
And the person conducting the investigation is Major General Ifat Tomar Yerushalmi, the military
At the very
advocate.
least, she's the one overseeing the investigation. Meaning this is
Thank
coming
you.
from her. I mean, she's the one overseeing the investigation. And she's basically saying, like, we tried, we couldn't find it. Here's our findings. And the attorney general accepts it and kind of goes to bat for her in the legal system, saying, look, she tried. I trust that she did a good job. Now, the attorney general, when everything comes to light and we find out that no, the military advocate general allegedly engaged in a cover-up, again, like I said, these are two separate crimes here. Usually crimes are prosecuted by the Attorney General's office. So the Justice Minister and many people like in society, in the public are like, hold on a second. You are conflicted here because while Gali Bar Miara, the Attorney General, is not accused of any wrongdoing, she didn't, nobody's saying that she participated in the cover-up or knew about anything, but she is a potential witness because she was working closely with the Military Advocate General and she accepted her investigation and went with it. So they're saying, hold on a second, you are at the very least a potential witness in this case. You cannot prosecute a case in which you are going to be, even if you're just going to be a witness in the case, that just doesn't work. That's a conflict of interest. So she's like, no. At first, she says, no, absolutely not. I should be allowed to do this. As the uproar gets worse, the Justice Minister, who, by the way, does not get along with the Attorney General, and that's putting it mildly. He is leading the charge within the government to get her fired. That's sneaking its way through the courts right now. But he says, absolutely not. You are not going to prosecute this case. I'm going to appoint a special prosecutor, and he appoints the judicial ombudsman, Asher Kula. The job of the judicial ombudsman is basically to oversee the judicial system to make sure that judges are behaving appropriately. He reviews any complaints about judges and then takes appropriate disciplinary action if and when is deemed necessary. In the end, this goes to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court sides with the Justice Minister but does not allow him to choose Asher Kula. The Supreme Court basically says, yes, the Attorney General, who, by the way, before the case got to court, she basically relented and said and was like she realized that like this is not a she's got to pick her fights here and this is not one that she's going to win. So she tries to delegate her responsibility to the state's attorney. Problem is the state's attorney reports to her. So it's still a conflict of interest because somebody who reports to her would have to call her to testify and at least the Justice Minister is saying that's not going to work. So the Supreme Court decides and says, yes, the Attorney General is conflicted. She cannot be the one in charge of this prosecution. The Justice Minister can choose a special prosecutor, but cannot choose Asher Kula for two reasons. Number one, the law of the judicial ombudsman bars the person who holds the position from holding another position of trust in the civil service. And number two, he is also conflicted because if he's going to be prosecuting a case in front of a judge, which he has oversight over in terms of their behavior, that also is not going to work. So they tell the Justice Minister, listen, you can choose a special prosecutor, and they give them a whole list of conditions that, qualifications that they need to meet, and but it can't be Asher Kula. He goes ahead, and a couple days ago he appoints Yosef Benamu, who was a district court judge in the Nazareth district. He has since retired to lead the investigation.
What a journey. There's so much in here. It could be a TV drama. I want you to also, I'm not sure if you shared it or if you shared it in full earlier about the personal life. Where is Yifat Tomer Yerushalmi, the Major General, right now?
So she's still in the hospital, as far as we know, after the second, as I said, I think I said earlier that after she was released from detention, she reportedly overdosed on sleeping pills, I believe it was, and was taken into the hospital for observation. And as far as I know, she is still in the hospital. Not a sad situation in terms of her health.
Very disturbing, and I can understand because something like this is it's so connected to your identity when you have such a big role, it takes over your life. And I'm sure that she was working day in and day out, morning till
And I
night.
believe, if I'm not mistaken, she was the second woman ever to achieve the rank of Major General in the IDF.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for sharing that with us. It's not for nothing, and it's not easy to become a first or to become a second or to uphold any kind of a big institutional role such as the one that she was filling. What I want to do is I want to zoom out and I want for you to take us home with the larger implications. What does this story mean for Israel? Does it mean anything internationally at all? And speak a little bit about why the left think that this is good for them and why the right think that this is good for them, because I've heard both left and right saying, "Oh, you're going to hear about this in the left-wing papers, you're going to hear about this in the right-wing papers." And there's different groups of people that think that this case is going to actually highlight or throw a shadow on some issue of judicial reform moving forward.
So when you say left and right, you're referring to left and right in Israel or left
In
and right
Israel.
in
In
Israel? Okay,
Israel.
because there is a difference. Okay, so in Israel, you did have, because of the whole ju judicial reform that came to light 3 years ago, and there was a lot of, obviously, it became very politicized. If you were on one side of the political map, we could call it left and right, though that definition is not the same as it was, let's say, when I was growing up, when left and right had very different meanings in Israel, what Israel should do vis-a-vis the Palestinians. Whereas now there's not much disagreement on that end in Israel. People like in the international media talk about like, Bibi's war, this is Netanyahu's war. We could talk about what would have done regarding a hostage deal, but no other leader in Israel is going to, all of a sudden be like, oh yeah, I think we can make peace tomorrow with the Palestinians. It's pretty much understood, even across the political map, even by Yair Golan, who leads the left-wing Democrats Party, that a Palestinian state is not happening tomorrow, and it'll probably be a generation before it could even be something that Israelis will look to reconsider. Getting back to your question, so the left, which you would call it like the anti-Bibi, anti-current government side, they were very much opposed to it. They were afraid that they were trying to enact laws that would, whether it's just,
You said opposed to it. You're talking about opposed to judicial
yes, the
reform.
judicial reform. I apologize. Yeah. They opposed the judicial reform because they were worried that they were trying to enact laws that would allow the right in this situation to amass more power or to have more control over the judiciary, whereas the right was saying the left wing, sorry, the current judiciary is basically an arm of the left, and basically it needs to be more representative of the Israeli people. A subject for another podcast about the history of that and where it stands today. But basically any changes to the system, even though there was a pretty big consensus prior to the swearing in of the current government that there needs to be some sort of reform to the judicial system. It's funny, I wrote an op-ed about it the summer before that election that got this government into place, and talked about how in order to get widespread agreement, there needs to be certain changes into how we elect our leaders. And then that kind of like the the forcefulness with which the justice minister presented his reform plan really kind of ricocheted off the other side and led to, all the protests that we saw 3 years ago regarding that. Now, coming back to this one issue of the Attorney General, one of the things that had been talked about when people spoke about judicial reform, not 3 years ago, but over the course of perhaps the last couple of decades, if not longer, was the issue of the Attorney General. Does the Attorney General have too much power in Israel? Many argue that she does, or he, or whoever is holding the position. And at the very least, the position should be bifurcated into the chief prosecutor for one position, and the other position being the advisor to the government. Because right now you have the same person who is both the legal advisor to the government and also the chief prosecutor of the country. And you have kind of this absurd situation that we saw under the leadership of the previous Attorney General, Avichai Mandelblit, who was on one hand prosecuting Benjamin Netanyahu and also providing Benjamin Netanyahu with legal advice regarding how to run the country from a legal perspective. So they'd be sitting in a meeting talking about whether this decision the government wants to take is a legal decision, and then in the afternoon, he'd be writing an indictment against Benjamin Netanyahu, which just is kind of, at the very least, is a very uncomfortable situation. Now, Mandelblit talked about this in interviews. He said he was able to compartmentalize. Whatever the case, people didn't like this. And so now what the government's trying to do is not just to split the role into two, they want to split the role into three. One person would be the legal advisor to the government, one person would be the chief prosecutor of the country, and the third person would represent the government in judicial proceedings that are brought against it. Whatever the case, that's where it's holding now. And of course, again, I talked about this a lot, 3 years ago with the judicial reforms. Unfortunately, it became very politicized on both sides, and you could not have it just was almost like impossible to get everybody into a room to kind of like discuss what needs to be changed because most Israelis wanted some sort of change. But you can't make the change. I have to make the change under my terms. Well, no, you can't do it under your terms. It has to be done under my terms. And then that kind of like led to this big fight that we saw, unfortunately, throughout the country that lasted for months until, unfortunately, October 7th happened.
Does this case with the major attorney general, does it have any place in this discussion? Is this going to embolden or any side, left, right?
Well, it remains to be seen whether the law passes. Laws in Israel need to pass three different readings. It's right, as far as I understand it's back in a committee, which are discussing it. The current coalition, politics has its own political issues. They're trying to survive until the next election, which is scheduled in October, November of next year. And, it could fall at any point, whether it's because of the Haredi draft or the budget that needs to be passed by March or whatever other reason might come to light. So this certainly could be an issue, but I don't foresee this particular issue of the bill about the Attorney General sparking the types of protests we saw 3 years ago.
And is this story of this leak followed by alleged cover-up, is this going to be a stain on Israeli society or is it just a news story passing on TVs?
I'd like to say it's a news story. Again, you're going to have Israeli critics, people who are vehemently opposed to Israel, not just Israel's policies, but Israel's existence, that are going to latch on to stories like this and just add it to the repertoire of stories, both real, fake, a lot of them fake, and trying to demonize Israel, whether it's anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism, that's a separate discussion. But unfortunately, of any country in the world, there's only one country that its right to exist is debated. Nobody's debating whether Russia has the right to exist, despite all of the human rights violations we see in Russia or in Iran or any of these other countries. So it's unfortunate that this is what it's come to. For whatever reason, this is the position Israel is in, and Israel's enemies are going to use whatever ammunition it can against it. Unfortunately, since October 7th, Israel became a pariah, despite the fact Israel was the victim on October 7th. So hopefully this is just, in the mainstream media, it's a story. It was covered. The men were indicted. The judicial system will play itself out and we'll find out if they're convicted or not. But again, there is no such thing as a perfect entity, and just the question of or expectation that Israel needs to live up to any standard of perfection, I think, is absurd because that's not expected from anybody.
Thank you so much, Benyamin, for taking us through all of this. If any of our listeners would like to get more from Benyamin, he has a popular Instagram page by Moalem online. He writes, he publishes as well. Thank you so much, Benyamin.
Thank you, Shanna.